Welcome, Mike. Nice to have you back again. And Hayden, have you presented to us before? I'm just trying to recall. Right, that's what I thought, but I had seen your face. So I've got Mike Scarsbrook, Hayden Jones, and Alice Wheatley-Wilson. Mike, I'll hand over to you to introduce Alice. I understand she's a very new staff member.
Yeah, kia ora koutou councillors. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and talk today about our greenhouse gas inventory. I just wanted to take an opportunity though to introduce our newest science staff member. Shall I wait? Or shall I continue on?
Carry on.
Carry on. So Alice had joined us. This is week 3 for Alice, and she comes to us from University of Waikato, and I'll let Alice explain a little bit about the work that she's done and her area of expertise. So,
awesome, thank you. Welcome, Alice.
Thanks, Mike. So I just joined 3 weeks ago and joined Hayden and Mike's team as a land and soil scientist, and I have a focus on peatlands and greenhouse gas emissions. And prior to coming here, I was at a consultancy, and prior to that, I completed my Master of Science Research, and that also focused on peatlands and greenhouse gases, particularly methane and carbon dioxide. And prior to that, I also did my Bachelor's of Science at the University of Waikato. I'll be focusing on the greenhouse gas inventory, both the corporate and the regional, and key focus on peatlands as well. So I'm really happy to be here and meet you guys, and happy to see what I can report in the future.
Thank you, Alice. I hope you have a great first experience, because I'm planning on having you back lots and lots of times. It's a rather large topic we need to deal with in the next triennium. So, but overall, this paper is about the greenhouse gas inventory, the regional one that we do every 3 years at present, and with a breakdown of the district information, which is quite helpful considering that's not the detail we get through the Stats New Zealand results, of which they were just released the other day, and which again shows the Waikato having quite a high emissions profile, which is unfortunate, but we do have obviously in particular the large agricultural piece that we contribute to the nation, and also the fact that Huntly, with its power generation that it contributes to the national grid, falling within Aotearoa. And so those are things that need addressing over time. That is incredibly clear. But I did have a chat with Karen, and it is just so important to put out there for everyone as well, that the need to address these emissions falls on all of us. And so when there are things that are contributing to the entire national picture, the national picture, in our view, is also required to help us with those emission reductions as well. So that's the big picture. But yeah, please outline what you've got proposed for this next inventory, and then we'll see what feedback we can give you on that.
thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll take the report as read. It was quite a short report. I just highlighted in a couple of slides some key points there. So if we could have the next slide, please. Sorry, the one after that. I just wanted to highlight, so the time frame, as Chair Nicol mentioned, we are doing our third greenhouse gas inventory, and I'd just like to acknowledge the work that Blair has done in the past around delivering those greenhouse gas inventories, and Karen as well. The inventory we've sort of brought into the science team to manage that piece of work, particularly given that the growing expertise with in-house science capability in greenhouse gas emissions, with the expectation that in the future we won't necessarily be drawing so heavily on external contracting to do this work. We'll bring a lot of that work in-house. As in the past, the work is a partnership between ourselves and our district council and city council partners. So in the past, the breakdown is is both at the regional scale but also down to that district level to help them with their inventory, and obviously they fund a component of the work that is of direct benefit to them. A new piece of work this time round will be, and this relates to the freshwater planning process and revision of the regional plan, is to try and understand how a freshwater management unit scale inventory what it might look like. And I guess we're still looking at two options for that case study, either the Waipa freshwater management unit, which makes up part of the Plan Change 1 area, the Waikato Waipa, or the Hauraki freshwater management unit, which covers large areas of wetlands and peat soils and obviously intensive agriculture and horticulture amongst other things. So we're still working through that. So keen to hear any thoughts councillors have about Waipa or Hauraki as potential case studies. Next slide, please. Also new is the inclusion of sort of explicit estimates of greenhouse gases from peat soils. So that's a first for regional accounting. It is incorporated into national greenhouse gas reporting, but we want to go into more detail given what we know already about the importance of peat soils and emissions from peat soils. Just from the timeline perspective, I guess the map on the right there shows the extent of peat soils across the Waikato region, with those areas in red being those areas still as peat wetlands, and the other areas, including green, for pastoral agriculture and other areas as well. So you can see even part of Hamilton having those peat soils. The southern part of Hamilton City. Timeline, so we'll be working to complete a draft report by January of 2023 and then putting the final report through council in March 2023. So reasonably short time frame, and we're just getting started on data collection and I just wanted to highlight, just on the next couple of slides, please, the national inventory, which, as the Chair said, came out on Tuesday. So the next slide, please. Just highlighting how important Waikato is in the national inventory. Obviously, the national inventory sort of uses national scale data and then downscales it to the Waikato using sort of per capita basis. So our approach is more sort of bottom up. We use local information to build our inventory. The national inventory sort of says, well, this is the national, and then breaks it up by region. So complementary in many respects, but also very valuable, the national inventory to give that annual time frame of change over time. Waikato there in the blue is the largest region in terms of the national share of total greenhouse gas emissions, so that's in CO2 equivalents in 2021. And also over the last 5 years, Waikato has been the region with the greatest increase in greenhouse gases. A lot of that coming from the services sector, principally around electricity generation. And then the next slide, please. Just highlighting that the emissions by sector there. So if you haven't already had a look at that national inventory, there's some really good information on the Stats NZ website, and some nice infographics where you can actually play around with the data. So if councillors haven't already had a look at that, suggest that be well worth a look. So thank you, Chair. That was all we had.
Awesome, thank you. And when you're topping a chart of having an increase in emissions in this day and age, it definitely shows we've got our work cut out for us, and a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. I am really keen for these data sets to be really relevant to people, and I find that they become relevant whenever they are timely, which is obviously something that I'm appreciative to Stats New Zealand. They've actually reduced the lag to what it was. And for us, I mean, the next council should have a conversation about how often we do it as well with the territorial authorities. And I think the Mayoral Forum should also have a think about that. And then what I was going to say is, have we had a conversation with the territorial authorities for this inventory as to what would really help them get that breakdown of scale? Because obviously we do it by district, but I'm just curious, for example, for Hamilton, would they have expressed any interest in having a Hamilton East versus Hamilton West, or for Taupo as a more of a urban versus rural section? I imagine we could work towards that in time if the desire is there, but I believe for the everyday person, that makes it even more interesting. Yeah. Anyone willing to answer that question? Or can we, if we haven't already?
I think, so first of all, because the territorial authorities are contributing funding to this piece of work, then obviously we would want the work to be relevant to them and their ratepayers. But I haven't had conversations yet about specific design, but I don't know if Karen would like to add to that.
I have had some conversations, and certainly speaking with Hamilton, their interest was in transport specifically and wanting greater granularity about where exactly can we focus our action to address the transport emissions, because from a regional scale, our last inventory showed that transport emissions accounted for 16% of our emissions, with 60% of those coming from Hamilton. So it's a real area of focus and opportunity, and that's obviously why our next item will be talking about transport and what's happening there. But that's just an example of one request I had from a territorial authority about what would be really helpful for them.
Awesome. Well, I may as well just get through my ones quickly and then I'll pass on to the other committee members. One was on page 52, paragraph 7, you're talking about possibly creating a list of emission sources. I would just say a big yes exclamation mark to that. I think that would really help our understanding of where the high emitters are in our region in a very relatable way if that was to come through this committee and through our information that we put out. And my 2 cents on the case study, to me, it seems like the Waihopiako area would be really, really good, just from the fact that it has the Hauraki Gulf with the blue carbon conversation that can be woven in there. Obviously, a lot of the contribution to our economy with the agriculture sector, the fact they're facing droughts in an extreme way that has a lot of other work happening around it in regards to the water security strategy, flood protection work we have there, and as I understand, we've got a very good working relationship with Hauraki District Council in regards to the resilience work already. So to me, it was a bit of a standout, but maybe that's just because I don't know enough about Waipa, but someone can correct me. I will pass over then to Councillor Teague.
Yeah, look, I'd endorse those comments too. I think that would be my pick for sure. Chair Barry before was commenting around misinformation, and one of the ones you hear a lot is that if we have more EVs, we're going to have to burn more coal in the power stations, and which sort of leads into the surprising figure you've got there of a 77% utilities contribution to the inventory. In fact, I've seen a report from Genesis, who operate the Huntly Power Station, and that report is saying that in fact use of coal has peaked for that plant. In fact, it's quite a steep decline, and that's even in a period when there might be sort of low hydro power ability. There's obviously a difference between the two, but even with that, they're saying that coal has peaked. Do you have any sort of sense of around that, whether that's the way you would see it panning out?
It's not sort of my area of expertise.
Right.
I would,
Fair enough.
yeah, peak or thereabouts. I mean, the idea that, obviously from a New Zealand Inc. perspective, we need to keep the lights on. We need to keep people, keep businesses going, keep households operating. So the reality is that when we're heavily dependent as a country on hydroelectricity, for example, when we have climate events that impact on that, then we do become much more reliant on other forms of electricity generation. But I think, yes, we're on a downward trajectory, but recognising that there's likely to be periods where we are going to have to utilise other forms.
And I think the other thing that Genesis are pointing out is that there's a heck of a lot of renewable wind and solar coming on stream, and they actually point to that as to, as part of their analysis as to why they're making that conclusion. As you say, we're at or very near to peak coal.
Yeah. And I think that the 77% there is relating to the increase that we've seen, particularly most recently with the drought conditions. We've seen the reduced hydroelectricity generation drives the need for places like Huntly to increase.
Okay, thank you. On that point, I'll just make a comment that in our energy pathway, noting the large contribution to with electricity generation in our profile, when I look overseas at some of the energy crises, as they are calling them, one of the responses has been to really look at the resource use and the services that might be more essential or less essential in powering an economy and empowering a society. And so, yeah, in that energy pathway, I think it would be really brave for the Waka Regional Council to have a look at working with the electricity stakeholders to understand where that electricity is going and some kind of understanding as to whether those things are hospitals, whether those things are less necessary forms that are like a nice to have, or whether it's to an industry that contributes to a large amount of GDP or a less, or that kind of thing. Just have an understanding there. But that's just something to put out there as something to consider. Stu Kneebone, you're the next one on the list.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I support the comments to date. I was at a Meet the Candidates meeting yesterday that wasn't for us, it was for District Council. But it was really interesting. It was in Cambridge and it was at a grey power, and the whole conversation, question and answer time was dominated by people wanting a third bridge for Cambridge, even though the evidence tells us that Cambridge, the two Cambridge bridges traffic movements are nowhere near what all the ones in Hamilton are, and so there's no justified demand for a third bridge. But no one wants to talk about it, and no one wanted to talk about better bus services in and around Cambridge and between Cambridge and Hamilton Te Awamutu as well. And it just strikes me that in terms of how we present this information, we need to present it in a way that's sending the right messaging to people as well. And the way Cambridge is growing, if the majority of the population there don't start thinking the right way, they'll just be whacking more and more roads in to allow more and more private car use and that sort of thing. So it's one thing to say Hamilton's got the highest emissions, but and look, I don't know, but unless that information's presented in a proportional way to per capita or whatever it is, then it's going to send the wrong messages to the people that we need to hear those messages, if that makes sense. Yeah, that would be my only comment.
Thank you. Have anyone else? Otherwise, yep, Andrew, sorry.
Alice, welcome to the Regional Council and to this committee. It'll be interesting watching your contribution. Can I just ask which consultancy you were with before you started here? Then I've got a detailed question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. I was with BTW Consultancy.
So the question is, if we were to say, find ourselves in a situation where we were able to block the drains coming out of the highest peat farms in the Waikato, would it be right to assume that as those farms became wetter and the mosses and lichens and the other specialist plants that inhabit peat swamps re-inhabited those farms, we would see a concomitant fall in methane or greenhouse gas production from those peats? Is that a model that I can bank, or is that a little bit basic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit more complicated than that, because an intact peat soil will form over hundreds of years, and so you can't sort of just leave your backyard peatland and allow it to recolonize. I think it would need a little bit more assistance in terms of planting natives and allowing a native succession, a more natural succession of native plants. And the issue with reflooding a drained peat is that you will get a skyrocket in methane emissions. So although you're not getting the carbon dioxide emissions from those drained peats, it then comes an issue of an anaerobic source of carbon. So yeah, it's not quite that simple. Yeah, I hope that.
So Chair, if you could just indulge me with my questions of Alice, how long do you think it would change for if you like, a homeostatic or a balanced ecosystem to develop in one of those swamps? Are we talking about hundreds of years, or within our lifetimes, or because where I'm going with my line of questioning is, what I can see coming down the track is some really ugly economic conversations, and we need to be able to use the brain sitting at that end of the table to say, we understand the risks, we understand what would happen if we say, well, we're going to go and buy those assets, so they're not your problem, they're our problem, and we're going to sit back and wait for them to make less of a contribution. I'm just trying to get a timeline. Is it hundreds of years or tens of years?
Naturally, it is hundreds of years, but we can accelerate those processes.
Okay.
But that requires a bit more research, and I guess that's why we are looking into things like polluter and doing these regional greenhouse gas inventories and looking at organic soils so we can get the data and understand what that might look like. And in terms of economics, we do need to find a balance. Obviously, there's a lot of dairy in our region, and peat soils are highly productive, so often dairy will be on peat soils. So I guess it's about finding that sustainable balance between not affecting people's livelihoods and the economy, but also sustaining this non-renewable resource.
Yeah, Alice, I suggest that we're going to have to do what leaders do, and we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions. My last question, which I asked earlier at Stratton Poll, is it strikes me that distributed generation in the Waikato is now probably at a scale where it's worth occupying our minds as to quantum, and I suspect it's gigawatts of power now that are being produced in a distributed generation network. So my question is, we know the impact utilities are having, but on the positive, and it wouldn't be hard to get this because there's only about half a dozen installers of solar panels, by way of example. It'd be very easy to get their sales figures and say for the Waikato, the number of houses that are now producing more than their consumption is, and the impact that has in terms of saving CO2, because we're not using, I think that's, We need to have some positive stories to tell, because otherwise it is just gloom and doom. And there are lots of people trying really hard to reduce their footprint, and we need to count that in some way if we aren't already doing so.
Through you, Chair, I think there's a really interesting investigation in what Councillor McPherson is suggesting. And I know Blair's been keeping a very close eye on some of the solar and wind generation interests around the region. We've also got, obviously, the geothermal energy being a significant part in the region. So I just wonder, Madam Chair, whether that might be a good topic for a report back to this committee early in the new triennium, if that would be of interest.
Yeah, definitely. So what I was hinting at before as well was a deep dive into the energy piece, whether that's generation or use. That would be really interesting because we had a great paper from Blair on the renewable energy opportunities in the Waikato, and by the time that comes around, it'll be quite good to get an update. And I personally am a huge fan of us having more conversations at our table around distributed generation opportunities for communities, because I know there are communities in our region who want to be somewhat or more self-sufficient or want to have their own generation and use systems in regards to even just resilience, so that if something happens with the national grid, that they have something asset-wise closer to home, I suppose. Yeah, so that would be fantastic. And your point the other day at Stratton Pole, Andrew, was really good. It was the measuring that as an indicator of progress as to how many installations of these smaller generating assets we have, as opposed to just the national large gentailers. Fred, go for it.
Yeah, reinforcing that we've got to have positive with this negative, even though the positive may be small. It's got to be included in showing how we're going to ramp that up. Even with our solar power, we were presented and they were talking about storage. They weren't doing storage because cost inhibitive. But I think it's something that we could be exerting pressure through consents, even though consent's probably not required, to actually look at applying that pressure or passively to for offset, off peak for when the sun's not shining. The other thing about the peat with Monica Peters, I did restoration or was doing restoration with peat, and it's pretty doom gloom. Once it's dried out and it's farmed, there's really no solution until it's back to the clay base. It's going to emit whether it's methane or carbon dioxide. And you can actually reboot peatlands by placing plants back into those areas. It's not easy. It's a balancing act, and no farmer's going to do that anyway, realistically. But there are things like maize, heading out of Hamilton here to Raglan, heading to Raglan, those big peat areas there that I guess are part of the Waikato, my area, and watching them burn last summer, the additional emissions that are coming out of there, and that's because they've drained it more to grow maize. So, we've got to actually say, well, that's a land use on peat that we've got to control.
So that's another reason why I thought Waihopiaka would be really interesting with the amount of peat there, because you're talking about doing the case study and then we have the extra expertise on peat. I'm perfectly open to that being a very large section of the report, and delving into the details and the breakdowns as much as possible, including perhaps telling some, as Fred mentioned, some good news stories of things that are happening in that region, which might be on the path towards good practice or polluter being attempted on a square paddock somewhere in the back of someone's farm. So I think that, Barry, I haven't seen yours. Go for it.
Just reinforcing the two councillors have mentioned on the positive, I do take this report as very much an inventory, but the message that we're saying as councillors, and I back this one, is you need, when you're running an inventory, you need the story about the messages about how to move forward. That looking at inventory on its own, yes, that's a job to do, but we have to link it to what are we doing about it. So to that end, we often miss what I call the science. There's some brilliant science going on by all those involved in agriculture in this region. It doesn't get a lens. It doesn't see the light of day because some of it is confidential, some of it is commercially sensitive, but some of it isn't. But that still does not get a lens as to the positive things going on in this region. All we tend to hear is, we've got all these cows, dairy, and there's methane and there's CO2, and it's all a negative story. So there is a lot of positives. We should be ensuring via this committee that, as well as doing the inventory, we are giving a lens to how we are adapting and how we're mitigating, because that lens is, I don't think, being applied enough. So that's my message, and I support the other councillors.
That's a great message to put forward. I think that's where the general mood is at, that we want to get into that space a lot more of talking about those positives. Okay, in that case, we might wrap this one up and just, if I move, and it is a good paper. And is anyone happy to second to receive the report? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much for the three of you to present on this one.
And as Blair said, always a pleasure talking to this committee. Karen said it was our favourite committee. I'm not sure I can say that, whether it should be environmental performance as well, but thank you very much, councillors. Appreciate the conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you for your work. So appreciated. In that case, I'm going to invite up Mark Tamura, Nigel King, and Julie Henson. If Julie's online, perhaps, or not here today, that's fine. Yeah, nice to have you both. Now, I'm mindful that Councillor Strange and Councillor Tegg and I are fairly across this topic, so it's mainly for the benefit now of Councillor Quayle-Littrut and McPherson and Nebo and Mahuta online. Great to have you there, Tipper. So please go ahead. I will say, please be mindful that the session is meant to finish at 12:30, about 15 minutes, but please do give the councillors that haven't heard a whole lot about this topic what you've got, because there has been a lot going on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members, both in the room and on joining us online. As you mentioned, Julie Hanson and my team, who looks after this work, would like to put forward her apologies today. She's out there doing the mahi. And in fact, during a recess, I saw a quick video of the Chair just up at the Parongia Lodge, which is actually where Julie is addressing some of the students today. So she's providing them with additional opportunities to look at, how can we reduce emissions across the region. So my thanks for having us here today. As the Chair noted, I'm conscious that half the room probably knows quite a bit about this work through your existing exposure, but please do stop me if you'd like to continue questions, and I'll try to aim to have you out by 12:30. I'm conscious you've been in the chair a long time this morning. Thank you. The purpose of the working group, there it is up on the screen for you. It's to drive change in the region towards a low carbon transport system. For those who aren't aware, the Transport Emissions Reduction Working Group was formed under the Regional Transport Committee in November 2021. Councillor Strange here is our chair there, and ably takes us through that work. And we heard Karen's update on the stats too, which were perfect, Karen. So 16% of emissions, with 60% of those occurring in Hamilton City. But what it does mean is that we've got about 2 million tonnes of carbon being emitted into our environment every year as a result of transport emissions. This was obviously of concern to members here, but also our Regional Transport Committee, which is why they established the working group to have a look at what can we do specifically to address that. So contained in the Regional Land Transport Plan, we do have a goal to reduce those emissions by 30% by 2030. That was adopted by in the first instance by the working group, with a view to continue to be ambitious in how we address that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see there are some guiding principles that the working group has come up with to, I guess, direct and understand where we are going. So the work of this committee has effectively landed a discussion document, which we'll continue to work through with our regional partners. I won't read them out to you, but I guess what we'd like to note is that every policy and action included in our regional transport emission reduction plan. If you don't mind me giving you another acronym, I'll just call it RTERP from here out. I'm conscious everybody lives with acronyms. So what we want this to do is to be embedded in local authority decisions, that with regards to transport activities, emissions reduction is considered number one priority in the application of I guess, any funding towards new activities that get undertaken. We heard earlier from the science team, and in fact, I'm going to have to go and have a look and make sure that the numbers are up to date based on what Stats NZ has revised. But the science is clearly telling us that what we need to do, and the reality is emissions need to be cut, and urgently. I'm preaching to the converted here. I know you're all well aware of this. So what we need to do alongside our territorial authority partners, who are the road controlling and land use authorities, we need to be bold, innovative and ambitious, as noted up there, in terms of implementing activities that will meet the changes that are required. So all members of society will need to be considered. We are not just focusing on urban environments, noting again that they do produce an overwhelming majority of transport emissions specifically, but what we'll have to do is make sure that we've got a range of interventions for different locations and different situations. One size does not fit all in this instance, and we're very conscious about how our region is made up. So what we really want to do is make sure that we find ways to leverage benefits beyond specific emissions reductions, and you'll see up there that leveraging of co-benefits is a key aspect of this work. And we note local government has a key and particular role in reducing transport emissions. So we have the ability, both ourselves as the Regional Council and our partners as road controlling authorities, have the skills, resources and knowledge of our local communities to actually help us affect behaviour change, so we can find these ways to help. I was just on I was multitasking. I was sitting on a special interest group discussion, and just this morning, and it was very clear that there is a requirement and a desire for this to happen across the country in terms of how do we respond to transport emissions. So as we note, just at the bottom, to deliver this is going to require a collaborative approach. We need to work with our partners and stakeholders. We can't do it alone, and we need to, I guess, leverage the benefit of the knowledge that already exists in our partner organisations in order to make this work. Next slide, please. Priorities and actions that you see up there, six key priorities and actions have been identified to help us achieve our reduction goals. So specifically urban form, and actually Councillor Nebo and you were speaking about this earlier with regards to Waipa and its bridges. A more compact urban form reduces reliance on vehicles. The need to travel short trips in a car can be avoided because daily needs like work, education and shopping would be available close by. A compact urban form is more able to achieve the mode shift, which in turn helps reduce emissions. So actually eliminating the need to use a vehicle for short journeys goes a very long way for us to be able to meet these emissions targets. We're very conscious that technology and infrastructure continue to advance rapidly, and we need to be prepared to respond to this also. So that includes our own initiatives through council, which members may have seen through our recently or near to be confirmed public transport plan. So looking at a zero emission public transport fleet, but also looking at road and street infrastructure that prioritises public transport and active mobility modes. We can also look at other ways to influence demand through parking plans and travel demand management plans, and just looking at how we respond to infrastructure technical specifications, travel planning, and a coordinated EV charging network across the region. Education is incredibly important for us to work towards, so focusing on developing a toolkit and public relations campaigns, working through Enviro Schools, which Julie is doing for us right now, and road safety programs, as well as school travel planning, all of which can contribute to, again, removing that need to travel for those particular purposes and achieving emissions reductions. Where we can really support that as an organisation is through advocacy and funding. So continue to engage and advocate with central government. So we do have adequate funding available to achieve what we're looking to seek to do, and give priority to a low emission transport system, which can be reflected at the top level through central government, through the government policy statement on land transport. One of the initiatives that we do have is to have a look at offsetting and how that might contribute to carbon emissions across the region. And this is looking at an enduring legacy project that, in addition to offsetting, would meet just our carbon emissions, would meet those co-benefits of looking at biodiversity, soil health and freshwater management goals. Final slide, please. Thank you. As you can see there, those next steps. So the next step is to do more work on the discussion document. So we have a draft discussion document that has been taken to the working group. They have encouraged us to go out and work widely with our partners to socialise this at a technical level and to continue to bring it back to the group in the next triennium. What we will do to achieve that is we'll be inviting our planning and transport partners, iwi and mana whenua, and stakeholders such as waka kotahi in order to form a staff working group. And that way then we can get input from our broad range of interests and make sure that we do have actually proper regional representation.
Could you just repeat form a what? A working group?
A staff working group.
A staff working group.
So this is to enable us to continue to operate, I guess, at a staff level, and then be able to bring that work back following the direction of members from the working group. So
is that kind of like we have for the EV infrastructure
yes,
working group?
Exactly analogous to that. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
That's great.
So actually that brings me to the end of the presentation. Happy to take questions from members through the chair.
Awesome. One piece of feedback from me, while I don't see any lights on, is the solutions in the transport space, my mind has landed on urban form and a provision of public transport that is quite phenomenal compared to what New Zealand's seen in the last little while, maybe more like what it has seen quite some time ago. So when it comes to urban form, two parts to that being that we need things that are essential services to be close to where we live, and hence I had asked, I had sent an email already to Mark and Julie. Apologies, I forgot to see yourself, Nigel, and that was on a recent article that was describing some research around the cities of New Zealand and whether they are a 5, 10, 15 or 20-minute city. And I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we had that table, but for some of the towns of a certain size in the Waikato as a bit of a breakdown. So that was one piece that I wanted to put forward. So that takes care of the likelihood that somebody might do active forms of transport for a lot of lifestyle. Then obviously is the funding of making footpaths and cycleways actually preferable to use and not just a 2 centimetre strip next to a road, which was the main priority in whatever that infrastructure project was. And the second hand being the public transport to facilitate those longer paths of mobility between the things that we do. And so one thing I would really love to see in future to have a look at is some possible futures. So let's just say 5 possible futures. One is doubling public transport in a certain area. One is tripling, one is quadrupling, one is quintupling. And just having a look at, just without too many other lenses clouding us, what that would mean for rates, what that would mean for likely uptake, or the amount of trips that we can provide the 15-minute services on that we have seen from data are so effective at actually getting people to change their behaviour. So that's just a bit of forward direction for something to think about while we're off busy with our elections. Andrew.
Can we go back to the previous slide, please? So, Nigel, I'm interested in this mode shift discussion. You ride to work, a push bike?
Not currently, no, but I do plan on buying an e-bike.
Yeah, good on you.
I happen to live in Cambridge, and I don't have a safe connection at this stage. But once the Te Awa path is completed, that is my intention to do it at least twice a week.
Well, that's interesting because the Te Awa pathway, for example, has had millions of dollars thrown at it, and you would be quite safe when it's completed to get on it in Cambridge and arrive on the outskirts. In fact, no, you could arrive down at the river and
City centre, yeah.
And then you can walk your way out. But trust me, and I don't do it very often, Councillor Kneebone does it more than I do. You take your, I've ridden a couple of times from Te Rapa into here, and you take your life in your own hands. And unfortunately, some poor woman, cyclist, was not so lucky at this roundabout within this year. So my question is, and I'm not convinced, while I hear your plea, Chair, for a model of a range of public sector options, if I was doing that option, I would put an option in there for an equivalent of the Te Awa cycle trail, because I think history's going to show that was a great example of shifting mode, because there will be a bunch of people who will want to ride to work coming down that. And you know, there'll be some people, I suspect, even in Te Awamutu, given something similar, would get on an e-bike and ride in here. But it's just not going to happen. So one thing I'd like to see us doing in advocating for mode shift is make it easier for people to actually adopt different modes. And the other thing I'd like to suggest is, having recently travelled on the train and on a bus from Te Awamutu to Hamilton, I was at length to ask the drivers about how predictable were their loads. And on an incoming bus, they can tell you by departure time, the load factor on that bus, and it goes from 10% to 110%. And going back from Hamilton, likewise 110%. And when it's at 110%, they limit the bus to 78 k's, so they get round the sitting down rule. So if we're under that mode shift, how nuanced can our thinking be around flexing the type of vehicle that we put, say, for example, going to Matamata or Te Awamutu or Cambridge, to listen to the drivers and give them a vehicle that is more suited to the load that they need? Or is that a long way in our thinking?
I might pass over to Mark to answer that one. He's got a little more technical knowledge in that than I do.
Thank you. Through the chair, you might have heard that the public transport operating model, PTOM, is being replaced with a new sustainable public transport framework. I refer to that because it will start to give us far more flexibility in terms of right-sizing vehicles to the run on the margins. So there will be routes where because of time of day or end of run or what have you, we'll have low loadings, and at the time of day we'll have the same vehicle operating with very low loadings, and other times of the day, rather than having two different vehicles. I heard one of our regional transport committee members, regional connection committee members, the other day use the analogy of a small truck can do a large truck can do a small job, but a small truck can't do a large job. So from that perspective, we will likely always have routes or parts of routes and times of day that will be effectively serviced by vehicles that are too large, and sometimes areas where vehicles will be stretched in terms of capacity. However, we do hope that the review of the public transport operating model into the new sustainable public transport framework will give us greater ability to align the vehicle requirements to the routes and services within the life of a contract, rather than locking in a particular fleet configuration. Not entirely locked in. You can always enter into a discussion with an incumbent. You'll appreciate those can be quite challenging conversations, but we do hope that the new framework will give us much more ability to right-size the fleet effectively. Sorry, would you be able to repeat the question through the chair?
The mode shift question. Sorry, what was that? I was just writing. Andrew.
So my question was about.
I'll repeat it.
Should if that's priorities up there, mode shift, what are we doing about advocating for making it easier, for example, for the Te Awa cycle trail effect from Cambridge to Hamilton to be replicated by, say, something equivalent from certainly Te Awamutu, because for an averagely competent cyclist on a reasonably good e-bike, that's very doable on a good track.
Yeah, through the chair, what we will see, and through I anticipate through this work, is so on one side we have a big pull factor. We have national policy. We have an acknowledgement that we have a climate crisis that's been reflected in government policy, regional policy, and also through investment buckets. So Waka Kotahi, the transport agency, their funding is done in buckets. They have their road maintenance activity. They have what has been a walking and cycling activity. They have a public transport activity, for example, and they use the size of those buckets because it's through those buckets that they provide their subsidy of, in general terms, 51% of the cost of transport investment. And so they size those buckets to drive investment. So by increasing the size of the walking and cycling bucket, we anticipate significant demand. We expect new activities to come into regional land transport plans for walking and cycling activity, and we saw that through the last RLTP with a more than doubling of the size of that investment. It was doubling off a very small base, but we expect the size of that bucket to continue to grow over time in line with the government policy statement. At the same time, we're trying to help our TAs to bring those investments into the regional land transport plan, because the regional land transport plan can but prioritise those investments that are submitted by road controlling authorities, because we ourselves, at this point in time at least, don't invest directly in that kind of infrastructure ourselves. But what we can do is through, and also hence the reason why it's so important that the staff level working groups and things are established and working, because our signals to our territorial authorities and road controlling authorities that you have to be ready to develop and submit investment proposals through your long-term plans that will roll into our regional land transport plan is the main opportunity we have to influence the shape of that investment. And so hence really important for this work to be happening where it is, because by the time we get through to the end of the 2023 calendar year, in effect, as we know, long-term plans will be formed up in large part, and as will the bids into the National Land Transport Fund via the Regional Land Transport Plan. So those are really our main. We've got this big, we've got the big incentive package that government's delivering, and then our role as the conveners of the Regional Transport Committee are trying to help our territorial authorities and our road controlling authorities pitch into that with greatest effect.
Music to my ears, because
Just remember the rail corridor.
yeah, because to have enough active and public transport improvements coming through to saturate whatever's made available would be my measure of success. Because you've got to ask to get, and if the TAs were not to put forward those projects, it would just break my heart because you got to ask to get. Councillor Tegg.
Thanks. Thanks for laying that out, Mark, because I think that's really the key to it. We need to sort of change that dial in terms of how TAs regard sort of their investment priorities in this area. And that was one of the major faults. I think we all admit now was a problem with the previous RLTP. So I think the key to that is producing a transport emission plan that's really robust and covers all the bases. And as you know, I think other members might not be totally aware, but we had a draft plan presented to that working group, and our feeling was that it needed some more work on it. We'd regard it as a discussion document at this stage. And then in the interim, Auckland has brought out its very substantial transport emission plan of its own. And Nigel mentioned, the collaboration that's going on at the staff level. So I wondered if you could just talk to, how that Auckland plan, for example, can assist us in developing our own plan, given this different emission profile and all the rest of it.
Yes, I think I'll pass over to Nigel shortly, but I think for me the biggest learning that we can take from the Auckland approach is that it effectively apportions an emission reduction target between different interventions. And I think that's really, again, would help our road controlling authorities. In their case, it kind of helps themselves and helps articulate it to the public. But in the case of the regional role in land transport outside of Auckland, as we have, would help us articulate what the expectations are through those plans. Because I should probably point out that there's a whole lot of things that sit below the line of a significant activity in the regional land transport plan. There's the big ticket items, and those are the ones that are explicitly prioritised and ranked. But there's a whole bunch of continuous activity that continues, and that's a lot of your renewals activity primarily and minor improvements. But I think what the Auckland approach tells us, gives us an example of, is that if we apportion even mode shift, for example, so how much of that do we expect to be, or would we anticipate being possible through transition to walking and cycling, to be achieved through transition to public transport, to be attributed to zero emission vehicles? That further helps our road controlling authorities to say, okay, in my locality, is my contribution going to sum up alongside the contribution of others to achieve what we need to achieve? And I think that's really, the example that the Auckland Transport Emission Reduction Plan gives us, and hopefully something we can work towards.
Thank you. Mindful that we're starting to lose people, but Councillor Schwark.
It's great, but how fast can we get this into our regional plan and start dictating to territorial authorities? You look at urban form and mode
We don't
shift.
dictate to them.
Look,
We've asked them and we would get in a working group to work alongside
we need
them.
to start dictating. If you look at Waikato District Council,
I'm sure we can get them on board.
And the brand new subdivisions that have gone in at Rangatahi, supposedly the enviro friendly, you can't drive a bus around it. There's not a bus stop. There's no cycleways. There is, and we're getting another 70 house subdivision on our high quality soils at Tiuku. There's no requirement to have a bike path, a bus lane today. Now, it's although how long do we advocate for this? And that's why I'm saying it's time to start dictating.
And we're co-creating these things with them. We'll get a lot more traction, in my view.
We've been trying for
we're going a whole nother level. But sorry, I will.
Yeah,
is it all right if I move on to Angela? I'm just keen to keep Andrew for the video that I made last night for 3 hours. Carry on, Angela.
Oh, thank you, Chair.
You've been sharing this stuff, so you know it. Cool.
Yeah, just wanted to just agree with what's been said around, we identified the problem in the last RLTP. I said that right. And so we've coming alongside TAs to get the right investments that we need. But probably for me within Hamilton, that infrastructure for the mode shift and more so the bus priority we need. We can put on more buses, but if they're just going to get stuck in all the traffic with everyone else, we need to go that next step and make it really important. But yeah, I've just like to say that the working group, you know, it's been a real honour to lead that. And thank you to everyone for your input on that, and to staff as well, for coming alongside and resourcing that. Yeah, and looking forward to where the future might go with it. So thank you.
No, and thank you for your work on that and all the staff involved. We will quickly pass the receiving of the report. Dennis and Angela move and second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried.
Right.
Thank you both. So I'm just going to make a couple of quick comments. I wrote some reflections yesterday since this is the last of our meetings. It was the first Climate Action Committee in the regional councils. We have made it a strategic priority, which is obvious from the fact that it is integrated and embedded so well into so many other committees that sometimes we've had to argue where to put paper, but it's been good. One of the proudest moments is when we got the Climate Action Roadmap through unanimously. I think that says a lot. We've traversed diverse topics. We've had speakers that have upskilled staff and councillors. We have a cross-interdepartmental working group, a steering group on climate, which means that we're trying our best to integrate where we can rather than be in silos. We've obviously hired new staff with specific skills so that we can keep getting deeper in this. I've been really impressed with some of the district council, city council who have hired extra staff in those specific skills as well. Particular shout out to Hamilton City Council, Waikato District Council, Hauraki District Council with their zero carbon promise and the shoreline work and just talking about things in the Thames Coromandel area, because they've actually, come quite a long way over the last 3 years as well. The future lies in doing this work in partnership and collaboration and co-creation. And one thing that's become very clear for me from the Greater Wellington work as well, clearer, is how important it is for councillors to also talk to each other around the country and around the region and not just the staff, because that way we're not recreating the wheel anywhere. And we can unashamedly just copy each other, even if it is, a climate chapter and an RPS, for example. But that is enough for me. I'm very proud of our progress and I think we've laid a good foundation. And while it's the end of this, I believe the turn of the triennium will be a great opportunity to step change how climate change is treated in the new triennium as well, and the pace at which we work at, considering what we can see out there, just hitting closer to home for so many communities internationally and locally, if you look at Nelson recently again. So thank you to everyone. And I might give Karen a very quick chance also to say something if she would like. Thank you for your work all throughout this time.
And thank you so much, councillors. I can't emphasise enough the importance of setting the tone from the top. And through your direction and your support, we have been able to ensure that climate response conversations are held throughout the organisation. And just this week, we had a Climate Action Roadmap Advisory Group, and that is the cross-directorate staff group. And it has grown from just a few lonely people picking this work up, because it is a new committee, so we were starting from scratch, to a room that was overflowing. Blair was inclined to take a photograph because it was overflowing, and we had people had to leave the room and go online to join the conversation. So hugely encouraging, and we've got a great platform from which to move forward in the new triennium. So thank you very much again, and thank you to all my colleagues. It's been a really, really interesting and productive term. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I'll call the meeting closed at 1:45. And for those who would like to stay behind before we stop the recording, we're just going to play a short video that I cut together last night after Fred and I visited the Waikato Regional Council / Enviro Schools Climate Bootcamp. You can see what a few of the young people there had to say about the topic.
Just before William hits close, can we just also record the committee's appreciation for your leadership, Jen, and yours as well, Karen. It's been really appreciated. Obviously, it wouldn't have, it's your idea, I think, to form this committee at the triennium. So well done.
And I'll give a shout out to my deputy, Councillor Tegg, who's always pushing us to go that one step further. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Bree. Let's play the video, but you're all welcome to start packing up and stretching. It's been a lot of sitting. And yeah, apologies, I'm an amateur filmmaker. Let's see.
Kia ora, I am in Parongia. I'm about to enter Parongia Forest Park Lodge, which is where Waikato Regional Council and Enviro Schools have been putting on a climate change boot camp for a bunch of young rangatahi from local schools. I'm going to put my Chair of Climate Action hat on and see what they've got to say. Let's go.
My name is Zach, I'm 15, I come from Te Aroha College. I feel like most of the youth and the seniors aren't focusing on proper climate change. They're just too busy on their computers doing anything. But I feel like we should have a change and make sure to lower our gas emissions and to make sure that we just do something. We don't overuse the gas we don't need. And I feel like that we could, instead of using coal for trains still, even though that is getting quite old now, we can completely stop petrol and coal and go to electricity.
Climate change make you think of?
What does climate change make me think of is that like it's just such like a big issue, and a lot of people aren't necessarily concerned about it, and it's like caused by humans, and like really big thing around the world that we kind of have to come together if we really wanted to make a change.
And I feel like just because of everything that we've accomplished, like the factories and manufacturing, electricity and cars and transport, increase in transport especially, it's just because it's so handy and useful for us, we've sort of forgotten all our old morals that humanity used to have.
It makes me feel nervous about our future, but also hopeful, knowing that we have really passionate rangatahi who really want to make a change. And I feel like being able to bring our voices together and actually make change that is sustainable and efficient, and yeah. I think climate change is a huge thing that we need to focus on. But yeah, I'm super hopeful that young people and just people in general can be able to make the change that we need to have a sustainable and healthy planet.
If we're going to be able to reduce our carbon footprint enough to actually make the difference that we need.
How quickly the impacts that are going to happen to our lives are going to. What am I going to be passing down to my children and future generations? What am I going to be laying on them?
Do you think we should take action on climate change? Any suggestions?
We should take the action of reducing the amount of nitrate going into our fresh water. Yeah.
We have to do lots of work on fresh water to also help climate change.
Okay, we do it.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of different things we can act on. Kind of like us as like human beings.
Yep.
It's quite a lot.
What are we doing currently to reduce to help with climate change? Like, what countries are we working with? What other people and organizations are we working with to try and make it happen?
That's an awesome question, because working together is literally how we have to do it. Yeah. Home now and cutting these videos into something presentable for tomorrow. As you can see, our rangatahi have a whole lot of things to say that are incredibly logical and on point. So let's listen to them a bit more often, eh? Thank you. It's unfortunate. I spent an hour this morning actually transcribing what they said because I knew there was so much background noise, but we happen to have played the one without the subtitles. But I'll email out to you if you want to have a look with subtitles, because there was quite a lot of noise. But thank you all. We'll call it a day and go and have some lunch. People are welcome to join us.